Cool. So thanks everyone for joining. Um, let's start. I think it's our fourth CI/CD design review, or maybe even fifth. So I see that we have a few people who submitted their work today, and let's start with Rayana's issue that she wanted to present last week. Still, right now.
Awesome. I'm going to briefly share the findings from the merge request pipelines usability testing. I already did the same presentation yesterday to our team, to the CJ team. I'm just going to touch base in some of the highlights to leave more time for Juan to go ahead and talk about his topic. So for those who are not familiar with this research, we wanted to first identify why people didn't know what the detached state meant in their pipelines. So Dimitri, I think you're familiar. You were the one that worked on this initially. So we got a lot of feedback, let's say constructive feedback internally, that people had no clue what that thing meant. And then once we released merge trains, then confusion started because you have pipelines for merge requests and pipelines for merge results. People had no idea how they worked and when they were activated. Then what does that mean? So we interviewed a total of 6 participants from all around the globe. So that was super interesting. 2 internal customers, so 2 GitLabbers and 4 external. All GitLab users, all engineers, so DevOps engineers, front-end, back-enders. And most of them did not have familiarity with the concept of a detached pipeline. So that was super interesting because I showcased them, I showed them like a UI first of the pipelines view with the detached label and asked them, so what do you understand by the detached, what do you understand the detached label by looking at this UI? And people were really confused. So I'm gonna quickly share my screen here so people that are watching this thing later on can see the topics. Yeah, I think you can see the doc, right? Cool. So when asked, what do you understand by detach on your pipelines, or what do you think detach means? People are really confused and they struggle to understand the actual meaning of it. Most of users thought that the detach label had some link with the detach state of their Git head, which is not true. They're right, it detached is a Git term, but it doesn't have anything to do with the using our product. And two participants were familiar with it, so they were like, yeah, I kind of know what it is, but their answer was not super sure. And in general, people didn't know why we chose the word detached, right? For them, once they actually understood what detached meant, or what the pipeline for merge requests mean and how it works, they'd say, okay, I don't know why the detached word was used. So that really highlights the problem, and now we have to look into a solution for that and find a way to rename this type of pipeline so that people can easily understand it in the merge requests view. So if you're not familiar as well, on gitlab.com, when you go to CI/CD pipelines, you probably see, we always have detached pipelines here. Yeah, so this is what it means. Another thing is that users expected to interact with this somehow. So when asked them, what would you expect that would happen once you clicked on it or when you interact with this component, they say maybe go into a list of detached pipelines or the docs or something that will help me understand why my pipeline here has this different state. It's not latest, or it's not just a regular pipeline. So it was really a really nice insight also on the way of how people go about this page to understand everything that is on the interface, because yes, it's a list, but for example, they really rely on these icons. So I could observe that people were just saying that, yeah, I know that this pipeline runs on master because of this icon. So they don't necessarily need to go and enter this pipeline. And that they were like, okay, trying to understand what's happening here and looking at the buttons and looking at the states to understand what this pipeline means. So there's also some room for improvement here. So maybe we can give them more clues. And another big thing is about configuration, because right now the way you configure your pipelines to be to work for merge results, that you have to go to your GitLab CI file and add only merge requests to it, to one of the jobs so that you want to run a merge requests. And some users, I think two or three out of six, say that it would be nice to opt out of this configuration instead of having to go to the GitLab CI file and configure it. And also another user mentioned that it would be interesting to configure this in the settings page instead of having to go to the GitLab CI file. And also another user mentioned that it would be nice that the CI file would, validate this if my pipelines, if my configuration is correct, yes or no. So that was super interesting because maybe I'm not gonna find this in the CI file because I imagine it's gigantic for us. Yeah, it's exactly this. So they wanted to validate because also under merge request view, the widgets, if this is not correctly configured, there is an error. And then the interface also doesn't tell people where to go to fix this. And of course, documentation. So it was really interesting to see, sorry, let me open this one. It was really interesting to see how people were struggling to find the correct information. So when I ask users, so where would you go about to find information about this topic, or where would you go to learn how to set up pipelines for merge requests? They went to Google, and then Google gave them 3 different pages, and there was a piece of information about configuration in each one of them, and the meaning of the detached pipeline was like in 1 line only. So people were really like, I have no idea what this means. I have no idea how to configure. I had to go to so many different places to configure this thing, and there's no clues on the user interface that will help guide them through this process. So even though they are familiar with the product, they really didn't have much of an idea of how this could be valuable to their workflows. So that really opens a good opportunity for us to improve the docs and see how we can make the workflow a bit more clear to users from the documentation point of view. And of course, some general feedback that they say that the sorting on the pipelines page can be improved. So if I go back here, oops, where was it? If I go back to the pipelines, some people are saying like, yeah, I don't care about all the detached, I only care about my latest. So how can you cannot really sort it, you cannot filter, and that if some pipelines are related, or for merge trains, for example, that this could be improved. So we'll definitely have to look into that as well and open a couple of issues. Yeah, so this was very interesting. People were super confused, and I think that was it was nice that we started this this investigation, because in the beginning we were really going for the quick solution. Let's just improve the tooltip in the detached pipeline, and now we know that it's not just about the label. It's not about people not understanding what the label does, but they don't understand what it means. And we could really improve in showing them how they can use it in their workflow. So that's a lot of opportunity for us in the upcoming milestones. And I think that's about it. So if you have any questions or comments, let me know. Shoot it. I'll give you some time to think.
One thing that you mentioned in there, and it seems to come up in like every conversation I have these days, is that idea that there are things that you configure in the YAML file, and it seems like half of the world, not half the world, probably 75% of the world wants to do it there. But then there's the other 25% that really want to do it in the UI. And we have this like wall between these two that we've yet to chip away at, or even like consider breaking down. So just curious if everybody else is experiencing that same conversation, because it seems to come up a lot in my daily workflow.
Can you repeat the first sentence?
So like we now it seems like we either have to like put it in the UI or make it available as an option in the YAML file. And there's really no way to do both right now. You either have to do it one way or the other, because we're not yet editing the YAML file for them or providing templates to edit it for them. So is anybody else bumping up against that, where you have to make that decision, where some users want it this way, but some users want it that way, but you're forced to go one and alienate the others?
I would say that in recent research I did, especially like there was one user who initially used GitLab CI, but then moved to GitHub because they just couldn't do the things they wanted to do in GitLab CI because it was either too complicated or GitHub made it much easier for them to do the same thing. I know there has been an issue for the longest time. I believe it's also a moonshot issue to make like a sort of like what GitHub does, right? Like a sort of GUI interface to creating a GitLab configuration. And I think there's lots of opportunities to guide the user in that.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it's driving at. That issue has kind of popped back up again of starting down that path, right? Of either chipping down that wall or probably it sounds like more likely what we'll do is have some sort of a templating system that at least lets you pick things and add them to the CI YAML file. I don't think we're ready to go down the route of like automatically editing that for customers because that gets hairy quickly. But I think a templating kind of system is a potential solution.
I think there's a very, very crucial reason why we also want to do that is because, and you will see it in the things that I'm going to present in a bit, there are situations where you have something in your pipeline that it's only going to work after like another artifact was already produced in another stage, right? And like you'll see what I'm talking about specifically with accessibility testing, but it may not be super straightforward and clear for customers that they need that artifact for things to succeed. And like there's nothing right now in GitLab that tells you like, okay, like you cannot add this type of job if you don't have this other type of job before, you know? So basically customers are like, it's basically up to them to go and like figure out that, test the pipeline fails, and then like they start debugging and they realize, oh, wait, this needs this artifact to work, you know? So, I mean, like, I think the YAML file is very usable, but it's a skeleton, right? Like you can do whatever you want there. And that doesn't mean that the YAML file that you're writing is gonna create a successful pipeline. So I think like, if we can increase the chances of writing successful GitLab YAML files from the beginning, I think that's like a big win for us, you know? I think the question would be like, where are people writing the GitLab YAML files? Are they doing it inside GitLab GUI, or like, are they doing it in their Visual Studio and then like just deploying, you know? And I think that changes things a little bit because it's not the same when you have like all the helpers of the GUI. And I mean, there you can do a lot of things, but if you are on Visual Studio, it's, I mean, what can we do there? Like perhaps have a plugin or have the type of stuff like a linter inside Visual Studio. But yeah, I think it's important to understand the journey of how they write those files as well. I don't know, honestly, maybe someone knows, but I don't know where writing those files.
Yeah, and that was one of the points I remember now, that one of the participants say that the learning curve for his team on writing YAML was very steep. So he said that no one in my team was familiar with YAML. So we got errors all the time. And then we had no idea why things were not working because, you know, I would expect that I'll get like what you say, linting there while I'm writing it. So that will be super awesome. And also about focusing on different, I think it's also the question that is, we want to automate everything, right? But do we need to automate the GitLab CI file, for example? I had a conversation with Jackie, our PM, yesterday, and she said that for some customers in the, what's the name in English, like the regulation industries, is that correct? So government agencies, right, banks, etc. They might not want to automate. They really have to go through the, you know, the more manual processes. So how can we ensure that it works both ways? So that for the people that have to write, you know, their GitLab CI, that we provide some checking and some more guidance through the UI, but also that the automation works correctly for people that just want GitLab to magically come up with their configuration files. So that's a challenge, especially that we keep adding more complexity, and some of this configuration is done in the setup, right? So in the settings of your project, and some has to be done manually, and you cannot really check if things are configured. And also, cat. How can that not be destructive? Come on. So I have to check if if configuration X on your GitLab CI matches configuration Y on your settings that have something to do with the UI, with the application. So I think that's also one of the challenges for us. Yeah, moving forward.
Good. Awesome. Sorry for taking that on a somewhat tangential discussion to the detached.
No, of course.
Points. Yeah, I missed the beginning. I was distracted by Slack message, and then I think that was a interesting how to say swing to the side. I'll add the comments later. Also, we'll listen a bit more in details. Any other comments?
I have a question. It's not really a comment, but I would like to ask, what do you folks think is the best way to showcase these findings, right? So right now I'm just talking about it and I'm just showing some pages. Would you folks think that it's clear when you follow, for example, a slide deck, you know, when we are showing something more visual? And I'm asking this is also for when we have to do this type of presentations to the engineering team or to the engineering managers. I'm really curious into, you know, how can we improve this so we can really show the value that we can bring with the research and with the research findings and you know, the insights. So maybe Lori, you're the expert here. So
yeah, I know. I was thinking about that too, because I know our culture is not presentation culture. Like make a deck, make pretty pictures to show people. I would assume, and I'm not the user here because I'm not a dev, but I would assume that they would want the story. Tell me why this is important. Tell me why I should make time to figure out how to solve this issue. If you need to show me a picture or two, maybe a video clip or something of somebody telling you a great quote. That YAML's hard to learn, and we spent weeks trying to figure it out. That might be good. And like knit it together in a way that you take them from, okay, we did this because we wanted to find this out. Now let me tell you a story about what we found out. And do it in about 10 minutes, not any longer than that, because people's attention spans. And then have some calls to action for them to say, like, we learned this. What do you think? Or, you know, what would your solution be? How would you want to solve this? Is that a thing to solve? Developers, you have a conversation with them as well. Get them drawn into the presentation. So you set the stage, give them the context of what you learned, and then have that conversation of, okay, now what? What are we going to do with that? I don't know if it needs to be a presentation, but that's up to you. If you guys know them much more better than I do, but visuals are always good. Humans are very visual creatures. Video is good. We're also auditory creatures. And also having somebody tell you, like having that user say the quote and have a video of them doing it is a lot more powerful than even you telling them what you've learned. So they can actually see, oh, that was shitty. That was not good. And so they can see that. So that would be my recommendation. And then I would also see if you can either get time in the meeting that they already have, or better, schedule a separate chat with them about this, because those meetings that they already have an agenda, and they're usually packed, and I don't even know if they can get through it all. So it's ideal if you can take some of that time, but if you can't, I would get another maybe half hour meeting with them to tell them the story, and then have that discussion with them, and then bring in the dev managers ahead of time, tell them what you want to do, tell them like give them like a little preview of your presentation, so they're not hit with it first either, so they can kind of start thinking. Maybe they'll have some questions for their team to get them also engaged in the presentation as well.
That's awesome. I would really love to experiment with more, dynamic presentations, because that's how I felt a little bit yesterday. Is that okay? Cool. They found it interesting, but not everyone. They were not all there in the call, and it's difficult to find the time slot where everyone is available, other than the meetings that we already have with the team. But I love the idea of showing some of the clips, so they can see that, this is how the user felt, and this is a real person. I think that it's going to really impact them in a positive way. Yeah, thank you, Laurie.
And I think like linking back to the insights repository, I think that's a big deal, because I think a lot of people don't even know of the existence of that. I think the more like we like, here's the issue to fix this, and here's where it came from. It came out of this one. It's going to help people like close that loop and understand that this is this magical place where you can go to learn stuff, right? Which is kind of the point of it, right? So I think we should do more of that, evangelizing that repository exists.
Yeah, in my experience in the past company as well, we did, if there was a task-oriented research, we posted the task or the question that we asked, and then we just placed like some kind of bold findings and something more visual. Maybe if that would be like a percentage coloration, we would use like a pie chart. I know that sounds awful, but it attracts a lot of attention. People will like to read statistics, I feel like. So that would work, okay, especially where there is a comparison, like for example failure versus success, or I know automation versus manual, or something like that. Those kind of like big bold metrics that are easier to see and judge are always useful. And I agree with Mike, it's nice to lean back to the details to be able to find out a bit more.
Yeah, and I think it's also be interesting once we have improvements, right, implemented into the product, and then we ask the same questions to users, and then we can see how they can finish the task or complete the task, and then we can show those two clips or show people, so this was the first experience and this is the second one. Because sometimes we don't really have, I don't know, we can measure definitely, but it's nice when you see someone that actually makes use of the product, that the workflow is part of their daily lives, doing the task, doing the job. So maybe this is something that we can bring back to the dev team as well, to engage them more.
Yeah, and if you will find a nice way, Rayana, or any way, it would be interesting to see that, because I feel like, well, we are all having that same kind of challenge. So it would be nice, it would be useful to share.
Awesome. So if no one has any more questions, Juan, you can take over.
All right, I'll do that. Let me just put a timer so I don't start talking a lot. All right, so let me just share my screen. This one. All right, so I'm gonna be talking about automated accessibility testing, which is it's an initiative that we're exploring right now in the testing group. So what is it? It's basically automated accessibility testing. So is this idea of testing accessibility on an app, doing like an accessibility check as part of the continuous integration process, right? So like, we already did some problem validation on these. Lori helped us, and then there were like a lot of like interesting findings and like things that we discovered there. So like we believe there's a lot of value here but it's definitely like a tricky thing. Like it's the way that we want to integrate it. It's of course like in GitLab's nature very MVC, but the MVC has like some, I will say caveats that you'll see later, but like yeah, it has like some things that we need to think about. So I'll show that in a bit. But anyways, that's basically what it is. So basically the idea is that you have like your typical CI/CD pipeline. In theory, this should run on the test stage, right? Like it's part of a test suite, and you should like put it inside your test stage. But as you're gonna see in a bit, it's not as straightforward. So basically, there's kind of like two existing. There's several, but there's like two like very big frameworks. One is Pally, and the other one is Lighthouse, which is like a built-in Chrome browser accessibility framework. These two frameworks, basically what they allow customers to do is load a website or like a specific web page, and then they're gonna basically run all their accessibility scanning on that website, and then they're gonna highlight the things that are wrong, that are not kind of like meeting the standard in terms of accessibility. So these frameworks, what they're doing is one-off tests against a web page, right? And then if you have a large web app, you need to run these against multiple web pages, right? And then like basically compile that report into a report for the app. So really one of the things that you're gonna see, which is kind of weird, is like there's caveats about these, right? It's not really as straightforward. One caveat, one big one, is that for you to actually do this type of testing, you need to run the framework on top of an existing app. So the only way that, and that means that this needs a browser context. And but what this means is that this needs a review app, you know? So it's not something that you can run on existing code. Perhaps there are some frameworks that actually do accessibility testing by looking at the code, but it's not really what's, like these things are not designed to do that. They're designed to look at the final rendered app and then determine the issues on the rendered app. So if you think about it from the context of GitLab, this is something that needs a review app, or at the very least, it will need us to tell, it will need a way for us to allow the customer to tell us where to look in terms when it's time to check and do the accessibility scan. So the caveat there basically makes this not a test stage job, it makes it a deploy job, because it really needs to happen after like all the other stuff happen. And that's, well, when I was talking before about like the YAML and the configuration, this is what I was trying to say. You know, it's for a customer who is super new to this, they might think, oh, this is a testing framework, this goes in the testing stage, and doing that will automatically fail the pipeline, because there's no artifact to consume. The artifact to consume is an actual URL of an existing website. So that's where it gets confusing. The other caveat is that failure in accessibility is a very great concept. We all agree that accessibility is a very important thing, that we should make our websites screen reader friendly, that we should make sure that like people with visual impairments can read things, that people with different like disabilities can access the content that we have, or like these for the context of GitLab, but like for anyone who's building an app, right? But determining what's the threshold to say like this is good or bad, this is gonna fail a pipeline or not, that's very subjective, you know. Like and every app, every company, every customer has different needs when it comes to this, and there's gonna be people who have very stringent needs and demands on this area, and there's gonna be people who wanna just meet the bare minimum because they also know that they just need to meet the bare minimum. So if you're designing an app for blind people, you probably wanna be at 100% in like whatever subjective things this is throwing for you. if you are designing like a random website, let's say like a news website, you might just want to make sure that things are like accessible in terms of a screen reader and like basics, you know. So all right, that's kind of a brief introduction. So I'm just gonna show some of the things that I have been working on. Let me stop the recording for a minute. No. Okay, I'm gonna share another screen again. So, okay. All right, so what we're trying to do right now is exploring, assuming that we have, so one of the first assumption, we decided that we're gonna go with Pali. That's the framework that we're gonna support by default on GitLab. So let's just start with that baseline. We assume that Pali is integrated into your pipeline, and we assume that like this is something that it's already happening in an existing pipeline. So now the question is, now that you set up that in a GitLab, let's forget for a minute about the fact that this is something that needs a review up. Let's assume that people who are setting up this already know by reading the documentation or something. So now the challenge is, how do we show these to the customer, and like what will be the first MVC for this, right? So this is an MR, right? So there's different ways that we can show these. So one of the things that I was exploring is the idea of doing basically the same thing that we do with security scanning. So if there are detected issues, or like if there are 0 detected issues, we always put these kind of like level, like MR widget level here. That row will allow them to expand and see details there, or they can view the full report. And the full report is gonna basically take them to this dashboard. There's another caveat about this dashboard. This dashboard, initially, we thought this was like a pure HTML dashboard, but this actually requires a database. So that's another reason why you need an app, because you actually, for you to show this, you also need to set up other stuff in your CI. So you will see this dashboard, and in the dashboard, you will see the errors and the warnings and the notices. That will be one way of doing the MVC, right? However, this might not be the best way to do it, because I don't think it explains a lot of the complexities that are below the configuration. So, and one of those complexities is the fact that this lives on top of a review app. This is not something that is checking on the code. So if you see all these guys here, they are basically checking the code. So what I thought, and you'll see in a bit, is that we could change that. The expanded view for this basically would be going and parsing the dashboard, and then from the dashboard displaying only the errors. So that's kind of like my suggestion there, and it will tell you the issues that it found and the principle that it's violating. So that's cool, that could work. But again, I have concerns about the fact that this is getting mixed here. So the other option that I was exploring is the idea of not putting that in this level of MR widgets, that basically all of them are related to code changes and things that are happening on the actual uncompiled code, but actually putting it as part of the context of, we already have a review app. So when you have a review app, as part of a pipeline, we add this level to that widget, and that if you have seen it, like it doesn't have this thing that says view accessibility report, but it does have view up and it has review and it has these things that I don't know what it is. I think it pauses the pipeline perhaps. And then you will see like the status of your pipeline through the icons, right? So what's the drawback of this approach is that you wouldn't see, like, you will have to dig more to see if it failed or not. Like right away, you wouldn't know like if there's like accessibility issues. You might know that there's issues because of these warnings, but again, this is where I come back to the fact that we cannot fail the pipeline. I mean, we could fail the pipeline, but in an MVC world where we're just shipping the minimum functionality, we don't have thresholds to fail the pipeline. So at this point, everything is a warning. And this is something that I want to find out more, maybe doing some research around this, but sometimes I suspect that warnings might be ignored, but I don't know. This is perhaps my persona. It's sometimes ignoring warnings. But yeah, I don't know. I feel that I would like to show that it failed, but still succeed somehow at a larger level. But yeah, that's kind of like one caveat. So the only way that they will actually be able to see what happened on detail, let's say like to know that actually what's creating the warning is the accessibility report, is to open the stage in which is running, and like in this case it should be actually the deploy stage, but I just put it like in this stage, and then you will see the accessibility app scan is what failed, and then you will have to go on basically dig deeper into that job, and then when you open that job you will see all the stuff, and what you have to do is basically browse the artifact, which is the report, or like download it, and then you will find the issues, right? So if you download it, you probably are not gonna get these because again, this needs a database, but you get another version of these. Sometimes it's just a JSON file with all the things, all the errors and all the things that are going on. So this one is less discoverable, but it's better in terms of showing that this lives on top of a review app, and that what you're seeing, it's a report of the app as it's rendered, not a report of the uncompiled code, you know. And I don't I think that's I think that's an interesting and an important distinction, because not everyone who's going to be doing these, checking these accessibility things, has the context of how these things are set up. So I think it's important to tell them how things are being tested, right? I think the other thing that I explored, it's basically the idea of, okay, maybe we keep this level, right? But instead, when you expand things, and this is super experimental, I don't think we have done this yet anywhere in GitLab, but because we already have a URL to show this, we could basically iframe this within the widget and show it there in context, right? So you will just need to scroll through these and see whatever you need to do, maybe download the JSONs from here or the CSVs and interact with the dashboard from here. And perhaps that's more clear than just seeing the errors as I showed before, because here you will see exactly what's happening. There's a lot of more context of how things were tested, right? So that's pretty much it. I think that is the things that I'm exploring. There's another part of this, which is how are we going to introduce the concept of accessibility testing, and how are we going to tell customers, hey, you need a review app. This lives on top of a review app. How are we going to prevent that people get confused with the fact that this is a testing job and that they need to set it up at the deploy stage, you know? So there's still many things that we're exploring, but yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to share.
Let's open it up for comments.
Confusing.
Rayana, I've seen you're placing some of useful stuff. I have a lot to add as well, but I just want to make sure that people go ahead first.
No, you can start. I'll finish writing down my comment here.
Okay. So the main question is kind of like, I see, Juan, you are experimenting with the placement of the like reports of the details on the accessibility testing. So if talking about which one of all of those presented was my favorite, for example, I think there was the second option where you kind of like wrote down the list of the happenings that are like the issues that have been found, and then provided a link to go outside and view it a bit more in details. For example, the reason why I didn't like inserting the page as an iframe, I think because it's gonna be, it's like, it's not big, it's not the full screen, so it's you will anyway kind of want to see I think more closer and more details. And I like that you kind of like suggested the two levels. So first, like leave the general things, and then if you wanna, you can go deep dive. One comment though I would like to suggest, like I see that you're using like A11 for specifying that this is an accessibility issue in the hover over that icons. I would suggest maybe you find some other way to make it more clear that that's accessibility. I know that that's the name of the tool, but
Right.
for people who are not really aware of what does A11 mean, maybe a more recognizable way. Maybe for accessibility, you want to have an icon or just write it as accessibility fully. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, and my comments were around firstly about the proposal where you have the button in like under the pipelines view, right?
Yeah.
Request widget. So also about like placement, that we sometimes have just buttons there. And it's nice that you're showing this because I'm working on some issues, this milestone, and I know I have some things assigned to me, the upcoming milestone, that we're going to have more buttons there. So just a heads up that, you know,
Okay.
this UI, it's not always static. So we need to see how these call to action buttons are going to UI if you decide to go with this view.
Right.
Another point is that I've also been experimenting in the warning messages in the same section where the security warnings are located. So I just linked here in the docs the issue I just worked on, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, where I suggest adding, where is it? It's a warning message. It's related to my previous point in this call. So warning message if pipeline for merge request is figured, but pipeline for merge result is not, or something like that. So that the application would to your GitLab CI file and then say, hey, in those warning, like security warning things, hey, you're missing a line here. No. And then you click and expand. But I also wonder, are people actually relying to that section for this type of, you know, warning message? Because it's all the way down in the merge request view, and sometimes we have so many. So my comment was also about that. How can we measure, you know, if people are on this section in the merge request view for warning messages in general? Are they aware that they have to go there? You know, is this the best place so that we can perhaps standardize and find, I don't know, the right location?
That's a great one, because actually TMR was pretty long. I just kind of like caught it on the design, but yeah, it was so long that you will have to scroll several times just to find what you want.
Yeah, because this page, it's getting longer and more complex by the day.
Yeah.
It's difficult. Maybe we can have like a tab saying warnings or security or whatever. You know,
I think that would be nice.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, there's many things that I feel that are important for this level in particular, right? Maybe changes to code quality. I mean, like that's kind of like one metric that you already know when you're working on your code. I mean, maybe you're paying attention to that, but these type of things that you are completely unaware of until like the app is rendered and tested, you wouldn't know those until you go and like you download and you start like playing with the report and seeing all that stuff, right? And yeah, I think that, of course, if I'm gonna be advocate for customers who are very into testing, I will say yes, we probably we basically own all like a large portion of these testing things like code quality and coverage, all that stuff. So I will say that even like a tab that is called like testing, you know, and it's basically just dedicated to testing. Of course, I'm not trying to be like here, like advantageous and saying like, oh, just give me a tab for my group. You know, I'm just saying because I believe that there's kind of like value in seeing that from in a separate context, you know, because many of the things that you're seeing here are like requests to merge. The pipeline, it's this pipeline with this from this MR is running, you know, and here's the review up, and here are the eligible approvers, you know, and then you see testing things, you know. So maybe if we completely broke like that will declutter the level, and then we will have a portion where we can be a little bit more creative. Yeah, I don't know. It will give this a better architecture, I believe, but this is just me speculating. We probably need to research that as well.
Yep, that's what I was just going to say, Juan. What we could do is come up with a couple of different designs, you know, and you don't have to design all of the process in multiple ways. You could just take a page and say, this particular page, I wanted to explore 3 different ways to present the information on this page. So you could do it like that and then put it in front of some people and get their thoughts on which one they prefer, why they prefer it, how they would use it. Is it even giving them enough information? Is there anything missing? That sort of thing. Because none of us are doing accessibility testing on things prior to production, so we are not the users here.
Right.
But I think you did a good job putting in what we learned from the research. Now it's just time to validate that with our end users.
For sure, yeah. I think one of my main concerns is actually on the YAML setup file, etc. But I don't think we can like address any of those things in the MVC of these. But I just wanted to call out that I have been thinking about that, and this basically goes back to Mike's previous comment on Rayana's portion of where he mentioned that, and I think that's I think as a stage we should think more about it. You know, I think if there's an area right now where we can add a lot of value, is there. I just don't know what's the solution yet for that, but I think we can definitely bring a lot of value and improve that area.
Is it worth having them a few questions about the YAML to this effort and then anybody else's efforts that they have on their plates to get more information? So like those 3 or 4 questions we always ask people, like, what do you do? How long have you been doing it? What are your top tasks? Is it worth asking a question or 2 in that section about YAML? I don't know, like, what have you know, I don't know what those questions would be, but if we put in everybody's discussion guides over a month or 2, we could get a lot of information back about that and be a little bit more confident on what we should do to help people.
Yeah, I think that would be pretty nice. I think especially asking people, tell me how you set up your GitLab YAML files. You know, if they can show, if we have evidence, previous art of people showing us 10 different people showing us how they do it, I think we have a lot of things to dig from that, you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
And also a heads up that maybe we can, the expertise from, I think Pedro, right, is responsible for merge requests, who's with in Pedro's. So they know a lot and they are, in a way, the owners of merge requests. So that we can also make sure that other designers are involved, because maybe they're working on some things. I'm talking about the interface right now, some things that might influence our decisions in the future.
Yeah, I'll show this to him. I'll make sure to sync with him.
And one small thing to consider here, Juan, is I noticed you said database was required. So we did just introduce the ability to make a review app or any environment like auto stop, because we had seen that, you know, if you don't do that, you'll get thousands of these things and it sooner or later becomes unmanageable. So hopefully moving forward, people will put in that that functionality. So these review apps will be only around for a short time. So just throwing that out there to consider what would happen if that review app is stopped.
Well, that's a great call out, because that's, as far as I know, like we don't want this to live forever, especially if it needs a database. This should but that's another, like, that's me being ignorant, but sometimes I like open like super old MRs and they still have a review app that works, So yeah, that doesn't seem wise, like that's consuming from our resources, or I don't know, I don't know where, like it's consuming from the customer resources, it's
Yeah, you used to not be able to kill them, so they existed and there was nothing you could do about it. But moving forward, they should, if you're doing it right, they should be a temporary.
Got it. So yeah, the reason why I think that's a great suggestion is because perhaps part of the MVC of this, when you're writing the YAML specification for this type of testing, you should also provide like a way to kill the app in the context of accessibility testing. I don't know. There's because you're saying they out stop, but that's not for all the apps, right? Or is that like a measure that's gonna stop like all the apps from now on, like they will stop after a certain time?
Yeah, we just introduced that, a way to write it in the YAML file that they do now expire. You can set expiration dates on them.
But my question was, by default, they all expire?
No, but you have to say that.
Set it up, otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right, yeah, I'll make sure to like introduce that into the concept. Because there's another interesting thing, like the accessibility report happens against an existing app, but once it's done, like the app can get killed. You don't need to like retest, rescan the app, So even if the review app is dead, the accessibility report.
I was just worried about the database, right? If that database has to exist, does that database?
Yeah, but the JSON file exists, right? Like the JSON file that supposedly loads. It's complicated. Basically, I think that Poly, which is the framework we want to use, it will need like its own app as well, which I feel it's gonna make this hard. But I don't know. I need to sync with the. I was gonna ask Drew, the person who, like the developer that's working on this, how it's gonna work, because I think that's gonna impact some of the design decisions that I make.
Yeah, I think it's a good call to double check anyway. I think we have to leave to another session, the UX meeting that's happening in 1 minute. Rayana, Juan, thanks so much for presenting. If anyone has any comments, please add them to the notes so presenters can follow up on those. Thanks so much for another great session. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.